I flew into Flagstaff the night before Thanksgiving, still in uniform because I didn't feel like changing in an airport bathroom that smelled like someone had fought God and lost. I drove straight to my parents' house, the same place I grew up in, the same house where every argument from my childhood was probably still floating in the walls. My sister Lauren had texted me earlier saying she'd try to stay awake until I got in, but by the time I arrived, she was already asleep on the couch with a heating pad wrapped around one knee. The swelling was obvious even through her jeans. My stepmom, Evelyn, greeted me at the door like she was the hotel concierge. My dad, Patrick, acted like I was the mailman dropping off a package. Ryan, my stepbrother, wasn't even there. Apparently, he was busy prepping for his big weekend. Nobody explained what that meant, and honestly, I didn't care enough to ask. The next afternoon, Thanksgiving looked exactly like the kind of photo people post online when they want strangers to think their family is normal. Big roasted turkey, mashed potatoes in the fancy bowl that only comes out twice a year, a table runner that I'm pretty sure cost more than my boots. Everyone acted way too cheerful for people who barely speak to each other unless they need money. I sat down next to Lauren. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from pain, not from staying up too late watching TV. She smiled anyway. She always tried to smile, even when her joints wouldn't let her open a jar without wincing. If anyone at that table deserved kindness, it was her. We passed food around. For the first few minutes, it was all harmless small talk. Turkey tastes good, weather is cold, football game is on later. The kind of stuff you say so your family doesn't start arguments before dessert. But I hadn't flown across 3 states for small talk. I came because there was one thing I needed to confirm, and there was only one moment where asking it would land the hardest. I waited until everyone had taken a bite. Then I asked, as casually as I could, "Did the hospital send my sister's surgery date yet?" Patrick didn't look up from carving the turkey. "Yeah, they sent it last week." I paused. That part didn't surprise me. I already had a feeling they'd gotten the letter and didn't bother telling me. What I didn't expect was the rest. Evelyn chimed in, cheerful like she was giving me good news. "We used her medical money for Ryan's birthday. He's only 27 once." I set my fork down. Not slammed, not dropped, set down. Because sometimes the quiet reaction hits harder than yelling. Lauren froze. She didn't make a sound, but her eyes went straight to me like she was bracing for whatever came next. She hadn't known. Of course she hadn't known. She never knows anything until it's already too late. I looked right at my parents. "So, you still don't know who really needs that surgery?" The room didn't just go quiet. It stalled. Airplane engine shutting down mid-flight level stalled. Patrick stopped cutting. Evelyn blinked like a deer in headlights. The whole table felt like someone had yanked the temperature down 20 degrees. They both stared at me like I had said something offensive, as if the offensive part wasn't them stealing the medical trust meant for their own daughter. Patrick tried to recover first. He gave that fake laugh he uses when he doesn't want to admit he's wrong. "Come on, Amelia, don't be dramatic. Families share. It's not a big deal." I stared at him, wondering if he actually believed that, or if he was just hoping I'd buy it. I'd been sending them money for over a decade. Military paychecks, deployment bonuses, housing allowance. Every time they said, "We're short this month," or "Just help until things settle," I wired more. Meanwhile, I lived like a college freshman on a budget. Instant noodles, cheap coffee, old furniture. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because they couldn't stop needing things. Lauren wasn't part of the problem. She never asked me for a cent. Whenever I tried to help her directly, Patrick or Evelyn would step in and manage it. Which was code for, take the money and decide how they wanted to use it. That's why I finally built the medical trust. My name, her name, strict rules, protected funds. I thought I had found the one loophole that would keep her safe from their habits. Turns out the loophole had loopholes. I took a slow breath. "You used money for her treatment on a birthday party." I wasn't asking. I was confirming the reality out loud so they couldn't dodge it. Evelyn lifted her chin. "It wasn't just a party. It was important for Ryan's networking." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the ridiculousness peaked so hard that my brain didn't know how else to respond. Networking. That was her justification. Using my sister's treatment money for a grown man's party because he wanted people to think he was relevant, Lauren whispered. I didn't know. I thought the appointment wasn't scheduled yet. The way she said it made something twist in my chest. She wasn't angry. She was disappointed. And disappointed people are the ones who've been hurt so many times they stopped expecting anything better. Patrick finally put the knife down and looked right at me. You need to relax. You act like this is some betrayal. I didn't blink. It is. That is Gad away. Silence. Thick enough to cut. He shook his head like I was the problem. This family has always relied on you. That's how it works. You're the responsible one. Responsible one. Translation. The one who pays, the one who fixes, the one who sacrifices, the one who doesn't complain. I could have recited the speech myself after hearing it all these years. I glanced around the table. Everything looked the same as always, the nice plates, the candles, the perfect holiday setting, but everything felt wrong in a way that didn't leave room for pretending anymore. Lauren's hands trembled slightly near her glass. Evelyn avoided eye contact. Patrick looked annoyed, like I'd ruined his meal by pointing out the obvious. I didn't raise my voice, didn't flip the table, didn't storm off. I just let the truth sit there with all of us. It was the first time I'd stopped cushioning my words to protect their feelings. Nobody touched their food after that. The turkey sat in the center, getting cold, while everyone pretended they weren't shaken. Even Ryan eventually came home and sensed the tension, though he acted like it had nothing to do with him. I didn't bother filling him in. I stayed quiet through dessert, quiet through the forced cleanup, quiet while Patrick made a few half-hearted attempts at conversation like nothing had happened. They acted as if ignoring the moment would erase it. They did that a lot. But that night, for the first time in years, I wasn't letting anything slide. Not after what they did to Lauren. Not after what they stole. Not after the way they acted like it meant nothing. And I wasn't done saying no. I carried my overnight bag upstairs and shut the bedroom door, letting the quiet hit me harder than anything said at the table. The carpet still smelled like the same detergent my mom used before she passed, which only made the whole house feel like a bad copy of something that used to be real. I sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, trying to let the anger settle into something I could actually use. Lauren had been diagnosed 2 years earlier after months of unexplained pain. The kind of pain doctors love to dismiss until a specialist finally puts a name on it, and everyone pretends they saw it coming. Rheumatoid arthritis. Early stage, but aggressive. I went with her to one of the first appointments, sitting in a plastic chair while the rheumatologist explained joint erosion like he was reading from a script. She kept nodding like it didn't scare her. It should have. She was 32 and already struggling to open a jar. The only reason she even got that appointment was because I transferred money to her account for the copay. Not because she asked. She never asked. I just got tired of watching her limp around while our parents acted like she had a mild cold. They weren't cruel in the traditional sense. They just had a talent for pretending problems didn't exist if they didn't affect them directly. And when it came to Lauren, nothing ever seemed to rise to the level of urgent. Ryan's lunch plans, yes. Lauren's ability to walk in 10 years, apparently not. The military made it easier for me to help. Steady paychecks, housing allowance, bonuses tied to re-enlistment and deployments. I wasn't rolling in money, but I had enough to keep things running. Every time something went wrong at home, Evelyn's car breaking down, Patrick's unexpected property taxes, Ryan needing cash for yet another failed project, they called me. And I wired the money. I wasn't even living in Flagstaff anymore. I was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado, bouncing between training cycles and 12-hour shifts. But somehow, I was still the default problem solver for a household of 3 adults who never seemed to solve anything. It started small, $50 here, a couple hundred there. Then it became bigger, covering rent when Patrick's consulting work fell through, paying for Ryan's college applications he never submitted, fixing the AC unit they let sit broken for months. Eventually, it reached the point where they didn't even ask politely. They'd just say, "It's due Friday," like I was some sort of human auto-pay setting. They always said I was the responsible one. It wasn't a compliment. When Lauren's diagnosis came in, I knew they'd mishandle it. Not intentionally, Just through that blend of denial and incompetence they did so well. So I set up the medical trust. My name, Lauren's name, strict rules, limited access. I even paid a lawyer in Colorado Springs to look it over. He told me it was airtight. I guess airtight doesn't apply when the people stealing from you don't mind lying through their teeth to a banker. I heard soft footsteps in the hallway and looked up. Lauren stood in the doorway with a blanket draped around her shoulders. "Can I come in?" "Yeah," I said, sliding over so she could sit next to me. She moved slowly, lowering herself onto the mattress like it required more effort than it should. She tried to smile, but her eyes gave away how exhausted she really was. "I didn't know about the money," she said quietly. "I would have told you if I did." "I know," I said. "I didn't think you did." "Go." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I'm sorry they did that." "You don't need to be sorry for something they did." She didn't answer. She never argued with them, never defended herself. It was easier to stay quiet than deal with the storm they created, anytime someone called them out. I used to think she stayed quiet because she was gentle. Now I think she stayed quiet because she was tired. Her breathing slowed. The swelling got worse this week. I looked at her hands. The joints were inflamed again, knuckles puffed up, skin stretched tight. "You need treatment, Lauren. Not next month. Not whenever they get around to it. You need it now." She stared at the floor. "I know." Lotting. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Did you at least get the appointment letter?" She shook her head. I asked Dad if anything came in the mail. He said no. Of course he did. She didn't say the rest, but I could hear it anyway. They lie to me the same way they lie to you. I leaned back against the wall. "We'll figure it out." She nodded, even though she didn't look convinced. When she left the room, I changed into sweats and stretched out on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Every deployment, every training cycle, every night shift I'd worked, it all flashed through my mind with the same annoying clarity trauma likes to use when it decides to replay things. My entire adult life had been one long exercise in patching holes my parents made, and now this mess with her. Her medical trust, her surgery, her once-in-a-year chance to stop her joints from deteriorating. They took all of it and used it to fund a party. I got up and opened the window. Flagstaff air was colder than I remembered. Crisp, dry, the kind that makes your nose sting a little. I breathed it in, trying to remind myself why I had come home in the first place. I thought coming for Thanksgiving might make things feel normal for a few hours. Instead, it confirmed exactly why I stayed away. My phone buzzed. Daniel Shore had texted me earlier asking how the trip was going. I typed out one sentence. "You would not believe this if I told you." Then deleted it. There was no way to summarize everything without sounding like I was exaggerating. He knew my family. He'd met them once. That was enough for him to understand the situation was probably worse than anything I could text. I tossed the phone on the nightstand and lay down again. The house creaked as it cooled in the evening air. Somewhere downstairs, I heard Patrick closing cabinets louder than necessary. Evelyn murmured something passive-aggressive. It didn't matter. They were background noise at this point. The only person I cared about in that house was the one whose pain they never took seriously, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I went downstairs the next morning with the kind of calm that usually means I've made up my mind about something big. The house smelled like reheated stuffing and burnt coffee. Patrick was already at the kitchen table, scrolling on his phone like he didn't spend the night stealing medical funds from his own daughter. Evelyn hovered near the sink pretending to clean, which meant wiping the same spot over and over while avoiding eye contact. Lauren sat quietly, stirring tea she probably didn't even want. I poured myself coffee and didn't say a word. Nobody did. It was the kind of silence you get right before a storm when everyone knows it's coming but pretends the sky is fine. After I finished my mug, I went upstairs, packed my bag, and headed out without announcing anything. I didn't owe them a speech. When I left, Lauren followed me to the driveway. She hugged me gently because anything more would have hurt her joints. "Text me when you get home," she said. I promised I would. The drive back to my hotel was long enough for the anger to start turning into something sharper and more focused. I hated feeling like the responsible one. I hated feeling used. Mostly, I hated that the people who claimed to love Lauren the most were the same people who kept sabotaging every chance she had at getting better. When I finally got back to the room, I dropped my bag, pulled up the medical trust account on my laptop, and stared at the balance. 0. Not low. Not unexpected charges. 0. Completely wiped. Whoever authorized the transfer had done it in a single transaction. The description line was a list of payments tied to event vendors, a lodge rental, a DJ deposit, catering, lighting, a photography package, champagne cases. Ryan's 27th birthday apparently needed the production value of a Hollywood wrap party. I scrolled through the account history until the transfers blurred. Every deposit I'd made over the last year. Every overtime shift I'd taken. Every deployment bonus. All of it gone. The trust wasn't supposed to be touched without my confirmation, but someone had given confirmation. The email address used looked almost identical to mine except one letter swapped. Cheap trick, but effective enough on a rushed banker who heard Evelyn crying on the phone. I clicked through photos on Ryan's social media. He'd posted everything: crowd shots, fireworks, slow-motion champagne popping videos. It looked like a festival, not a birthday. In one clip he yelled, "Shout out to everyone who made this happen." The crowd cheered like he'd cured a disease. Meanwhile, his sister was losing her ability to walk because he partied with money meant for her treatment. By midnight, I'd gone through every transaction twice. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was past angry. I was in that cold space where the emotions flatten out and every decision becomes simple. A little after 2 in the morning, my hotel room door rang. Not a gentle press, the kind that means someone is either drunk, stupid, or both. When I opened the door, all 3 of them stood there. Patrick red-faced, Evelyn with a stack of papers clutched like she was serving a warrant, and Ryan looking guilty but still wearing the hoodie from his birthday weekend. Evelyn pushed past me without waiting to be invited, which was bold considering she had stolen medical money hours earlier. She slapped the stack of papers onto the small desk. "All of Ryan's cards are declined," she snapped. His gas card, his Amex, everything. I didn't bother correcting her because this wasn't about accuracy. This was about entitlement. Patrick stormed in behind her. The car payment bounced. The bank sent a repo warning. You know how embarrassing that is? I shut the door behind them. Not because I wanted them inside, but because I didn't need other hotel guests watching a circus in my room at 2 in the morning. Ryan lingered at the threshold like he wasn't sure if he should come in. "They cut off the lease too," he muttered. "Management posted a notice. You know how strict they are." "Strict, right." As if not paying rent was an unreasonable rule. I crossed my arms. "Why are you here?" Patrick jabbed a finger at the papers. "You need to turn everything back on, now." No. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The word hung in the air like an alarm. Evelyn blinked fast, like she couldn't believe she'd heard me correctly. "Excuse me? You heard me." Patrick stepped closer, lowering his voice like he wanted it to sound reasonable. "You don't get to pull out of your responsibilities because you're upset. This family depends on you. That's the problem," I said. Ryan finally walked inside, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I'll pay you back once my brand deal hits. Just turn the cards back on for now." His brand deal. He said it with a straight face, which was impressive considering he'd spent 10 years working on his content creator career and made roughly $60 from it. I pointed to the medical trust paperwork on the table. "You spent my sister's treatment money on a party." Evelyn threw her hands up dramatically. "We had no choice. Ryan's networking is important." I laughed once. Not a real laugh. The single exhale kind people make when they can't believe the stupidity in front of them. "You had a choice. You just didn't care about the consequences." Patrick slammed his palm on the back of a chair. "We are your family. That means something. It means you shouldn't have stolen from the one person here who actually deserves help." He stiffened. Evelyn pressed her lips together like she was physically holding back an insult. Ryan looked down at his shoes. "This stops," I said. "All of it. I'm done paying. I'm done rescuing. I'm done covering for you." Patrick's face turned bright red. "You think you can walk away from us?" "I'm not walking away," I said. I'm letting go. Evelyn stepped forward until she was inches from me. You're making a mistake. You don't know what we can do. I met her stare. Neither do you. Nobody spoke. The room went still, not because the fight was over but because they had finally run out of excuses. Their whole system depended on me never standing my ground. Once I did, the whole thing cracked. I walked to the door and opened it. Time to leave. Patrick gave me one last glare. Evelyn muttered something under her breath. Ryan shuffled out, looking smaller than usual. I closed the door behind them and locked it, not because I was afraid they'd come back but because I was done letting them in. The room was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned rather than empty, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. I woke up the next morning with the kind of clarity that usually follows a decision you've avoided for years. I packed up, checked out of the hotel, and made the long drive back to Fort Carson. The hours on the road gave me time to think, but when I finally drove through the gates, the base looked exactly the same as always: soldiers running in formation, trucks rumbling across the lot, the usual chorus of engines and boots and clipped voices. It was grounding in a way my family never was. I swiped into the building, nodded at a few people I worked with, and headed to my office. Nothing felt out of place until I saw a yellow sticky note slapped on my monitor. See CPT Howard, as soon as possible. That was never a good sign. Nobody leaves sticky notes for small issues. I walked down the hall to the admin office. Captain Howard was already waiting, tapping a pen fast enough to drill a hole through her clipboard. She looked up the second I stepped in. Rhodes, close the door. That tone wasn't anger. It was the tone people use when they're about to deliver something official and annoying. I shut the door and sat. What's going on? She took a breath like she didn't want to say it. We got an email last night. Supposedly from a family member expressing concerns about your mental health, potential PTSD symptoms, and suicidal ideation. I blinked once. From who? It came from a woman claiming to be your stepmother. Of course it did. She slid a printed copy across the desk. I didn't even have to read beyond the first few lines to recognize the style. Evelyn had a very specific way of making herself sound like a victim while throwing someone else under the bus. The email went on about me being withdrawn, unstable, unpredictable, and possibly a danger to myself. She packed more drama into 3 paragraphs than most people manage in a year. Howard leaned back. You understand we're obligated to follow up on these reports, even if they're false? She gave me a look like she wished the answer were different. We still have to follow procedure. That word again, procedure. The bureaucratic machine that doesn't care if the accusation is trash, as long as the box gets checked. It wasn't Howard's fault. She was doing her job. But knowing something is routine doesn't make it less infuriating. She continued, behavioral health has been notified. They'll contact you for a screening. And until that's completed, your clearance is temporarily suspended. I stared at her, not out of shock but because I needed a second to process the scale of stupidity I was dealing with. My clearance is suspended based on an email? It's standard protocol. Temporary. Temporary can still ruin careers. Temporary can still derail assignments. Temporary can still mark your file in ways that follow you for years. I set the email down and kept my voice even. Ma'am, my family is upset because I cut off financial support. They're retaliating. I figured it was something along those lines, she said, but I can't write off an official complaint. I'm sorry. The thing about military apologies is they're sincere in tone but useless in effect. I thanked her anyway and stood to leave. On my way back to my office, Daniel Shore intercepted me like he had been waiting. You okay? You look like someone just briefed you on a mandatory fun day. I handed him the paper. He scanned it quickly, jaw tightening with every line. You've got to be kidding me. I wish. This is garbage. They can't take this seriously. They can and they are, I said. Clearance is on hold until behavioral health signs off. He shook his head. That's insane. Welcome to my family. He followed me into my office. Tell me what happened back home. I didn't go into detail, but I gave him enough. The trust emptied. The party. The 2 a.m. invasion. The entitlement. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I trusted him more than anyone else on base. He set the paper on my desk. "They're escalating. No kidding." Before he left, he said, "If you need anything, statements, attendance logs, anything that helps establish your stability, I've got your back." That was more helpful than he realized. Military bureaucracy has two gears, slow and slower. But when you know how to navigate it, you can collect a trail of documentation that shows exactly where you were, what you were doing, and how stable you were while doing it. I spent the rest of the morning pretending to work, but watching the behavioral health inbox like it owed me rent. The appointment request came through around noon. Screening scheduled for the next morning, mandatory attendance. I added it to my calendar and tried not to imagine the kinds of notes they'd write based on one false report. After work, I stopped by the base coffee shop. I needed caffeine and a few minutes where nobody asked me to sign something. But even there, I couldn't shake the irritation crawling up my spine. My family didn't just want money, they wanted power. And when I cut off the money, they went for the power instead. I reminded myself not to underestimate how far desperate people will go when they feel threatened. They had a motive. They had access to enough personal details to make a fake story sound plausible. They had zero shame. Perfect combination for dangerous stupidity. When I got back to my apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter and opened my laptop. I logged into the trust portal again, hoping I'd imagined the whole thing. Still zero. Still a list of transactions tied to the party. Still a trail of evidence that made everything feel both surreal and stupidly predictable. I clicked through the security logs. The confirmation email had gone to the spoofed address. The banker had called the number Evelyn used. There was a voicemail recording stored in the system. Her crying, claiming Lauren was in crisis, and saying she had my verbal permission to release the funds. She used my full name, rank, and unit. It wasn't a guess. She must have taken it from some document in the house. I pressed play. Her voice filled the apartment. Dramatic, breathless, convincing if you didn't know her. "It's for her sister. She's overseas. She said I can handle it until she gets back. Please, we're desperate." I stopped the playback. Overseas. She always thought the word military meant we were constantly deployed like action movie characters. She didn't even bother checking if I was stateside. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. The kind of deliberate that comes from entitlement disguised as concern. My phone buzzed. A message from Lauren. "I heard Dad talking. They said you're unstable. I know it's not true. Please be careful." My jaw tightened. If Lauren was hearing that, it meant Patrick and Evelyn weren't just lying to outsiders, they were rewriting reality inside the house too. I replied, "Don't worry about me. Just take care of yourself." I set the phone down and closed the laptop. The apartment felt too small for the anger running through me, but underneath the anger was something steadier. A decision forming. A boundary hardening. A sense of direction I hadn't had in years. And I wasn't letting anything slide anymore. I showed up to the behavioral health screening the next morning with the same attitude I use for annual dental checks. Let's get this over with so everyone can move on. The clinician asked the standard questions, typed my answers like she was scoring a test, and wrapped the whole thing in under 40 minutes. She didn't seem concerned. She probably saw 10 real cases a week and instantly recognized when something was manufactured. By the time I left the building, I felt more irritated than worried. I wasn't scared of an evaluation. I was irritated that my family had the power to trigger one with a single dramatic email. Nobody tells you, when you join the military, that the worst paperwork you'll ever deal with won't come from the army at all. It'll come from the people you share DNA with. I drove home intending to eat something, maybe sleep off the frustration, but when I checked my mailbox, there was a thick envelope from TRICARE wedged between a pizza coupon and a flyer for a dog grooming service. The envelope alone felt like a warning. Inside were 7 pages of claim denials. The first line hit me like a slap. Multiple emergency psychiatric admissions have been flagged for review. I read it again, slower, even though the words didn't change. According to the paperwork, I had been admitted to 3 different facilities in Arizona within the past month, one for acute mental distress, one for suicide observation, and one for inpatient stabilization. Each one had my name, my birthday, my member ID, and a digital signature that looked like mine. The charges added up to around $47,000. Every part of it was fake. I called the TRICARE customer service line and spent 20 minutes fighting an automated system designed by someone who hates human beings. When I finally reached a real supervisor, I explained the situation and she pulled up the claims. She hesitated. "Ma'am, these were submitted through a provider portal. They were verified with your full ID information." "None of this happened," I said. "I wasn't even in the same state on those dates." She lowered her voice like she was sharing forbidden knowledge. "We'll escalate this, but we're required to freeze your coverage until the investigation finishes." Freeze my coverage. Exactly what I needed while trying to keep my life from unraveling. She read the IP addresses tied to the submissions. They were all from my parents' neighborhood. Not the house specifically, just close enough that the pattern was obvious. When the call ended, I stood in my kitchen staring at the paperwork spread across the counter. Every fake claim, every fabricated admission, every forged signature. It was all laid out like evidence in a case I never volunteered to be in. And while I was trying to let the reality sink in, my phone buzzed again. "Lauren, they're talking about you," her message read. "They said you're unwell and you're the reason everything is falling apart." I typed back, "Are you okay?" She replied, "I'm fine, just confused." Confused wasn't the word I'd use. She was stuck in the middle of a slow-moving disaster she didn't cause and didn't know how to stop. I cleaned up the papers and tried to make dinner, but I barely got as far as boiling water when someone pounded on my door. Not a knock, a pounding that shook the frame. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing in the hallway. One of them, a woman with tired eyes and snow melting off her jacket, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we received a 911 call from a family member saying you were attempting self-harm. We're required to perform a welfare check." I just stared at her. "You're kidding." She wasn't. They entered the apartment and did a full sweep, checking the bathroom, the bedroom, the closets. One opened my nightstand drawer, another glanced through the laundry basket. It was invasive and humiliating, even though I knew they weren't trying to embarrass me. They were doing their job. Someone had given them enough detail to make the call sound real. That detail told me everything I needed to know. Patrick and Evelyn weren't just lying to institutions, they were escalating. They were getting creative. They were using my military career as leverage because they knew it was the one thing they couldn't take money from. The female officer returned to the kitchen where I stood with my arms crossed. "You appear fine. No signs of harm. I'll need your signature on a refusal of transport form." "Tell der." I signed it, the pen dragging a little, because my hand was shaking from anger. Before she left, she pulled out a card. "If they call again, request my name. I'll flag the address so this doesn't get abused." Abused. That word landed hard. She saw through it faster than most people did. After they left, the apartment felt too quiet. I leaned against the counter, letting the silence settle, and tried to decide if the next move was anger or problem-solving. Problem-solving won. It always does. I opened my laptop and started compiling everything. The fake claims, the police report number, the behavioral health email, every transaction related to the trust, screenshots of Ryan's party, even the printouts of the birthday photos where he was crowd surfing while my sister's treatment window was closing. The evidence pile grew until it filled a whole folder on my desktop labeled CYA. Because at this point, covering my own ass had become a full-time job. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Lauren. It was my commanding officer. He asked if I could meet the next morning to discuss recent concerns raised about your well-being. I stared at the message, knowing exactly what this was. The welfare check had hit the system, and someone had logged it. The irony was almost funny. My family had spent years insisting nothing was wrong with my sister, but they were working overtime to convince the world something was wrong with me. I plugged in my phone, shut the laptop, and sat on the couch letting the exhaustion hit. Not the physical kind. The kind that builds from knowing every step you take is being watched by someone who wants you to fail. The kind that comes from realizing the people you kept afloat for years were eager to sink you the moment you stopped paddling for them. I took a long breath, the kind meant to steady nerves and slow down thoughts, and let the quiet settle again. The next day would be another round of explaining things I didn't do, disproving lies I never told, and cleaning up damage I didn't create. And I wasn't afraid of any of it. Walking into my CO's office the next morning felt like stepping into a meeting I already knew the script for. He didn't look angry, just concerned in that professional way officers use when they're trying not to escalate a situation. He asked if I was all right, if anything was going on at home, if the welfare check was accurate. I told him the truth without giving him the whole soap opera. My family was retaliating after I cut them off financially. Someone made false reports. TRICARE was investigating. Behavioral health had done a screening. Everything was documented. I wasn't a danger to myself or anyone else. He nodded, listened, and reminded me to keep the chain of command informed. The military version of good luck with all that. After the meeting, I went back to my office and pulled out the folder where I'd been collecting evidence. The stack of documents was already thick. Every fake claim, every screenshot, every receipt tied to the blown-out party. I stared at it long enough for the frustration to settle into something solid. This wasn't just messy, it was criminal. I wasn't going to fix it by staying polite. By noon, I had the name of an attorney recommended by one of the senior NCOs who dealt with a family fraud case years earlier. Her name was Sharon Whitford. She worked out of a small office 20 minutes off base, specializing in financial disputes, guardianship cases, and familial misconduct, which is a polite way of saying she cleaned up when families acted insane. I pulled into her parking lot after work. The building was quiet, the hallway dim, the kind of place where lawyers do their best work because they don't waste money on fancy foyers or marble bathrooms. When I walked into her office, she was already sitting behind a desk stacked with case files, glasses low on her nose, expression sharp enough to cut paper. "Captain Rhodes?" she asked, standing to shake my hand. "Yes. Sit. Let's get to it." She didn't waste time. I appreciated that. I explained everything from the medical trust to Ryan's birthday circus to the welfare check to the behavioral health screening. She didn't interrupt once. She just took notes at the speed of a court stenographer. When I finished, she set the pen down. "How long have you supported them?" "About 12 years. "And how long have they been retaliating?" "About 12 days. End quote. She exhaled like that told her everything she needed to know. "Your parents and your stepbrother collaborated on the financial theft. Someone submitted fraudulent insurance claims. Someone impersonated you to release the trust funds. Someone filed a welfare call with enough detail to trigger a police response. And now they want to file for adult guardianship?" I nodded. She leaned back, tapping her fingers on the desk. "This isn't incompetence. This is coordinated. Someone coached them." She didn't say Evelyn's name, but she didn't have to. There was always one person bold enough to push the whole family off the cliff while acting like she was the victim. "Before we do anything else," Sharon said, "we need evidence. Real evidence. Everything you have." I handed her the folder. She opened it, scanned the pages, and stopped at the TRICARE claims. "These signatures are fake," she said. "They used a stylized version of your name, but the strokes don't match. I can get a handwriting expert to certify it if needed." She skimmed the event invoices. Did Ryan seriously hire a drone photographer for his birthday? Apparently, she didn't even smirk. Expensive stupidity always leaves a paper trail. Good. She read the transcript from the banker who authorized the transfer. "Your stepmother pretended you were overseas?" "Yes. I acts with praise. And the banker didn't verify?" she cried. Sharon sighed. "They always cry." There was something comforting about her tone, clinical, not emotional. She treated the whole thing like a solvable equation. She continued reading. The welfare check, the email to my command, the behavioral health notice, the police card left behind. She processed each piece like she had seen every version of this behavior already. When she finished, she closed the folder. "Here's what we do. First, we subpoena the bank for audio records and call logs. Second, we subpoena TRICARE for the submission IP addresses. Third, we subpoena the event vendors. People who work at parties love talking. Someone will remember who paid, how they paid, and who said what." She paused. "Fourth, we request Lauren's medical records directly from her doctor. She'll cooperate," I said. "Good. If her RA is as advanced as you're describing, the court won't appreciate that the treatment money was spent on fireworks. She flipped to a clean page on her notepad. Now for the guardianship petition. Do you have it? I do. I handed her the copies delivered by the process server. She read the first page, then the next, then the next. The lines between her eyebrows getting deeper. This is bad, she said flatly. Not for you, for them. She tapped a paragraph halfway down. They claimed you're unstable. They claimed you're dissociating. They claimed you made threats. None of this is supported by any actual incidents. If anything, the documentation you have proves the opposite. She underlined a section in the filing. They also claimed you cut financial support out of malice. I cut it out of exhaustion. Exhaustion isn't malice, she said. Malice is stealing your sister's medical trust and using it to hire a cover band. She wrote 3 words in all caps. Pattern of exploitation. Courts care about patterns, she explained. And your family has one. I watched her write more notes, quickly and precisely. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't cold either. She had the energy of someone who fought legal battles like math problems and didn't take losing personally because she didn't plan to lose. She asked for the login records for my military calendar, deployment timelines she could verify with public documents, and my behavioral health screening slip. Everything that showed stability, everything that contradicted their story, everything that made their claims look like the fiction they were. When she finished gathering, she sat back. Next step is simple. We build the counter case, not just to defend against theirs, but to bury it. Her tone was calm, professional, but the confidence behind it wasn't subtle. It was the kind of certainty that made me feel, for the first time since Thanksgiving, like maybe I wasn't the one drowning in all of this. Before I stood to leave, she added, one more thing. Don't contact them. Don't respond to anything they send. Don't give them anything they can twist. They're not trying to fix a relationship. They're trying to create evidence. I already figured that out, I said. Good, she replied. Now let's get to work. I walked out of her office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief, not hope, just a sense of direction strong enough to cut through every lie they had built around me. Leaving Sharon's office felt like stepping out of one battlefield and straight into another. The air outside was cold enough to sting my face, but it actually helped settle my head. I drove back toward base with the radio off, letting the quiet sit while I replayed every piece of what she said. Coordinated, deliberate, coached. All words I already knew inside but never wanted confirmed out loud by someone who deals with real disasters daily. When I reached Fort Carson, the gate guards scanned my ID like usual, but one of them nodded toward me a little longer than needed. It wasn't suspicion, just recognition. People talk fast on a military base. A welfare check or a flagged evaluation might as well be printed on a bulletin board. I didn't blame them. Soldiers gossip harder than church ladies. I parked, grabbed the folder, Sharon asked me to start expanding, and headed into the building. I didn't even make it halfway down the hallway before Staff Sergeant Hale, one of the CID investigators, stepped out of an office and motioned me over. Captain Rhodes, got a minute? CID never asks that unless it's mandatory. I followed him into a small interview room. It wasn't intimidating, just plain white walls, a government-issue table, and chairs that felt designed to ruin posture. Hale closed the door and sat across from me, opening a manila folder with my name printed on the tab. Appreciate you coming in, he said. We need to clarify a few things about a report forwarded to us yesterday. I sat straight. What kind of report? He slid a printed email across the table. I recognized it immediately. The same one Captain Howard had shown me, except this copy had all the internal routing tags on top, timestamps, chain of command forwarding, protocol notes. My family's drama had moved through the system faster than most operational requests. Hale scanned my face like he was measuring my reaction. The email claims you're experiencing significant mental health issues, potentially tied to deployment history. There's also mention of erratic behavior and self-harm concerns. My stepmother sent that, I said. None of it is true. He nodded once. We figured. It doesn't match your record, your evaluations, or the statements from your command. But when a complaint includes specific deployment references, we're required to verify. That word again. Required. I should have gotten it tattooed at that point. He continued, "We'll document your statement now. No pressure, just the facts." I did. I walked him through everything. The stolen medical trust, the retaliation, the fake TRICARE claims, the welfare check, the guardianship filing. Hale took notes like someone who had heard stories like mine before, maybe not identical, but close enough to understand the shape of it. When I finished, he leaned back. "Families can get messy, but your situation is unusually layered. That's a polite way to put it. We'll run the standard checks, confirm your location on the dates they mentioned, verify absence of behavioral incidents, check command interviews. It won't take long. Your CO already vouched for you." It felt strange hearing that. I'd spent years working under leaders who barely learned names, so having one who actually paid attention hit harder than expected. Hale closed the folder. "If they make further accusations, notify us immediately. Don't try handling it alone." "I won't." As I stood, he added, "And Captain, you're doing everything right." Praise from CID is like spotting a unicorn, so I took it. I stepped back into the hallway and barely made it 10 feet before running into a lieutenant from JAG. She wasn't looking for me specifically. She was delivering documents to someone else. But when she saw the paperwork in my hand, she stopped. "Are you Rhodes?" "Yes. You'll need to meet with us too." "Your CO forwarded a copy of the guardianship petition." Of course he did. In the military, every problem gets shared like a group project nobody signed up for. She led me to a small office lined with binders labeled things like legal assistance and administrative actions. She flipped through the file while I sat across from her. "This petition claims you're incompetent and require parental guardianship," she said. "It also states you're endangering yourself and others due to unstable behavior." "That's false." I assumed as much. "Your record doesn't reflect any of this. But since they filed with the state, we need to prepare documentation from the Army side. Your clearance suspension complicates things, but not in a damaging way. It's standard procedure after a wellness report. Is it going to affect my career long term? Not unless the allegations were credible." "They're not." She highlighted sections as she spoke. "This reads like someone tried very hard to sound official but didn't understand how guardianship laws work. They used outdated terminology, misquoted statute language, and referenced behavioral symptoms inconsistent with PTSD criteria. Translation: they Googled everything and hoped it would stick," she continued. "Once the court sees the counter-evidence from your attorney and your military record, this petition will collapse. But the damage they attempted to cause is serious enough that you should pursue legal consequences. Otherwise, they might try again." That part wasn't a warning, it was a reality check. She printed a formal memo for me to sign, a short summary confirming I was aware of the pending legal issues and had been advised by JAG. She stapled it neatly and handed me a copy. "Stay available for further interviews, and keep your documentation organized. Courts love structure." "I'll keep everything sorted." When I walked out of the building, the sun was starting to set behind the mountains. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that wakes you up instead of numbing you. I didn't feel panicked or overwhelmed. I felt something closer to focus. The military side of the mess was stabilizing. They had protocols, paperwork, systems that didn't crumble under emotional manipulation. My family didn't have any of that. They had desperation, ego, and the ability to create chaos faster than they could clean it up. Every move they made was reckless. Every lie they told left a trail, and every attempt to frame me made their motives clearer. When I got home, I spread the new documents across my table, adding them to the growing stack. It looked less like a personal folder and more like a case file at this point. Evidence layered on evidence, facts over fiction, every page building toward the same conclusion. They overplayed their hand. Lauren texted me again that night. "They're nervous. Dad keeps making calls in his office. Evelyn keeps whispering." I sent back, "Just stay safe." She replied with a simple, "I'm trying." I set the phone down and kept working through the paperwork, labeling files, printing timestamps, cross-referencing dates. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was precision. My career, my sanity, my stability, they had tried to compromise all of it. but they hadn't counted on how closely the military teaches you to document everything. And once I started putting the pieces together, their whole plan looked even weaker than they probably realized. The drive to the courthouse in Coconino County felt strangely calm, considering the stack of chaos the last few weeks had been. Sharon rode with me, mostly because she wanted to go over the timeline one more time, but also because she didn't trust Arizona family courts to behave themselves without adult supervision. She had a binder thick enough to qualify as a weapon, tabs color-coded, exhibits numbered, statements highlighted. I appreciated the organization. It balanced out the circus my family had turned themselves into. When we pulled up, the building looked exactly like the kind of place where people walk in with hope and walk out with regrets. Neutral brick, old landscaping, a flagpole with a slightly tangled flag. The parking lot was half full. Normal people handling normal problems. And then there was us. Inside, the clerk pointed us to courtroom 3B. The hallway echoed with each step. When we walked in, Patrick and Evelyn were already seated at the petitioner's table. Evelyn looked polished in a way that only came from desperate overcompensation. Patrick wore a suit he probably dug out from the back of his closet. Ryan sat behind them scrolling on his phone, acting like this was an errand he didn't want to run. Lauren wasn't sitting with them. She was by the opposite wall, hunched slightly, a file of her own clutched to her chest. Her joints were swollen again. Even standing seemed painful. She gave me a small nod. I nodded back. The judge entered middle-aged, sharp eyes, the kind of expression that said she had zero patience for nonsense. Everyone rose. The bailiff called the case, then we sat. And the silence stretched long enough for the tension to settle into everyone's shoulders. Petitioner's counsel, some attorney who looked like he survived on billboards and daytime TV ads, stood first. He launched into a speech about grave concern for Amelia's mental stability, concerning behavioral patterns, and urgent need for protective oversight. It was impressive how many words he managed to say without actually proving anything. Sharon didn't look impressed. She didn't even write notes. She just sat with her arms crossed like she'd already diagnosed the entire situation and was waiting for everyone else to catch up. The judge listened politely, then turned to him. "Counselor, please explain the basis for alleging incompetence." He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the respondent has displayed erratic behavior, severed necessary financial support for her dependent family members, and..." Sharon stood. "Objection. Relevance and mischaracterization. None of these allegations meet the statutory requirement for incompetence under Arizona law." The judge raised a brow at petitioner's attorney. "You have evidence of incompetence." He shuffled his papers. "We have statements from family members and neighbors documenting unstable conduct." "Sworn statements?" the judge asked. "Yes." "Verified?" she pressed. He hesitated. "They are notarized." That wasn't the same as verified, and everyone in the room knew it. The judge motioned to Sharon. "Your turn." Sharon stepped to the center with the confidence of someone who dismantled egos for sport. "Your Honor, the petition is not only baseless, it is fabricated. We intend to prove intentional fraud, financial exploitation, and purposeful damage to my client's military career." She handed the judge a thick exhibit binder. Exhibit A. TRICARE claim logs documenting fraudulent psychiatric admissions submitted from IP addresses located near the petitioner's residence. Exhibit B. Bank records detailing the unauthorized transfer of funds from a medical trust intended for Lauren Rhodes' rheumatoid arthritis treatment. Exhibit C. Statements from multiple witnesses recanting sworn affidavits after admitting they were paid to sign them. The petitioner's attorney blinked like a man trying to remember which pocket he left his dignity in. Sharon continued, flipping to the next divider. Exhibit D. Deployment records, behavioral health evaluations, and command statements demonstrating that Captain Amelia Rhodes maintains full mental fitness, has received no disciplinary actions, and shows zero indicators of incompetence. She stepped aside. And Exhibit E. Our witness, Dr. Michael Ortiz. The side door opened, and Dr. Ortiz walked in wearing a clean suit and carrying a folder. He approached the stand, took the oath, and sat. Sharon approached. "Doctor, please state your credentials." He listed them: board-certified rheumatologist, 15 years in practice, specialist in autoimmune progression. Not the kind of person juries or judges like to argue with, Sharon continued. You are the treating physician for Lauren Rhodes. Yes. When did you diagnose her? 14 months ago. And what did you diagnose? Rheumatoid arthritis, aggressive onset. The judge leaned in slightly. Sharon nodded. Explain to the court the importance of early treatment. Dr. Ortiz opened his folder. There is a 6 to 12-month window where biologic medication can prevent irreversible joint damage. Miss that window, and the patient faces long-term deformity, chronic pain, and reduced mobility. And, did Lauren receive the recommended treatment? He shook his head. No. The treatment was delayed. Severely. Why? Sharon asked. He slid a statement forward. The funds needed to begin therapy were not available. Lauren told me she believed money had been set aside but was told the appointment was pending. Sharon turned to the judge. The funds were set aside. $160,000. Petitioners spent that money on a birthday event. A murmur rolled across the courtroom. Sharon didn't need theatrics. She just kept going. Doctor, can you describe the current state of Lauren's joints? He looked at Lauren sympathetically. Damage is already present. She is experiencing decreased grip strength, severe inflammation, and early erosive changes. The judge looked at Lauren. Is that accurate? Lauren nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes. When Sharon stepped back, the judge studied petitioner's counsel. Do you have any medical testimony to contradict this? He swallowed. No, Your Honor. And do you have evidence to support the claim that the respondent is incompetent? No, Your Honor. This court takes allegations of incompetence seriously, the judge said. I see no credible evidence. In fact, I see substantial evidence of wrongdoing by the petitioners. Patrick stiffened. Evelyn's jaw dropped. Ryan finally looked up from his phone. The judge closed the binder. The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, based on documented fraud, financial exploitation, and potential perjury, this court is referring the case to the county attorney for criminal review. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was firm, sharp, and final enough to hit harder than any shouting match they could have thrown at me. She banged the gavel once, and that was that. Patrick looked stunned, like he just realized the world didn't revolve around his entitlement. Evelyn's face went through 4 different stages of shock and landed somewhere between anger and panic. Ryan seemed confused, as if this whole thing wasn't about his champagne-fueled weekend. Lauren stood slowly, joints stiff, but she held herself straighter than I'd seen all month. Sharon packed her binder with the efficiency of someone finishing an easy puzzle. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk. She just said, "Let's go. It's Osman's Kilta." We walked out into the Arizona sunlight together, no triumph, no victory speech, no dramatic exit, just a steady step forward like the air was finally clearing after weeks of breathing smoke. Walking out of the courthouse into the Arizona sun felt different than I expected. No satisfaction, no rush of revenge, no dramatic sense of justice served, just a quiet shift inside me, like a door that had been jammed for years finally moved an inch. Sharon headed to her car without ceremony, telling me she'd send updates as the county attorney moved forward. She wasn't the type to linger. She fought battles, closed files, and went on to the next war. I respected that. Lauren came toward me slowly, careful with each step. The stiffness in her joints was impossible to ignore now. She gave a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you," she said, voice low. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You deserved better than all of this." Her fingers twitched like she wanted to hug me but wasn't sure her arms would cooperate. So I hugged her first, gently enough that it didn't hurt her, firm enough that she knew I meant it. Patrick and Evelyn hovered across the parking lot, arguing with their lawyer. Ryan paced near their car, phone pressed to his ear, voice rising, probably trying to convince someone, maybe a friend, maybe himself, that the judge was wrong. Lauren pulled back slightly. "They're going to blame you for everything." "They already do," I said. Her eyes flicked down. "They're scared." "They should be," I replied, not out of aggression, but because it was the first honest thing anyone had said about them all day. I walked her to her car, made sure she could grip the steering wheel, then watched her drive off slowly, favoring her right arm. It hit me then. She would never get back the window she lost. RA didn't care about apologies or excuses or court rulings. Damage was damage. When I got back to Colorado later that evening, my CO handed me a memo clearing me from any behavioral flags. The behavioral health clinician had already submitted her report stating there were no concerns. CID confirmed the allegations from my family didn't match any evidence. My temporary clearance freeze was lifted before I finished my next duty shift. The Army wasn't emotional about it, they just updated the system and moved on, but it was the closest thing to relief I'd felt in weeks. Back home, I started sorting through the remaining documentation, not because I needed to, but because keeping things organized gave me something solid to hold on to. Every page told a part of the story: the forged claim forms, the party invoices, the guardianship petition. Each one was a reminder of how quickly a family can twist itself into something unrecognizable. A few days later, Lauren texted me again. "Hands worse today. Doctor says progression is faster than he hoped." I called her. She sounded exhausted but trying not to show it. "I'm starting physical therapy next week," she said. "Insurance is covering some. Do you need help with the rest?" "No. You've done enough." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing more than talking. Then, softly, "I wish they didn't do this." "I know." Another pause. "I wish they didn't do this to you." That part hit harder than anything the judge said. Patrick and Evelyn weren't in contact with me, not directly, but word traveled. A neighbor of theirs reached out to Lauren. Then Lauren told me the county attorney's office had filed preliminary notices of investigation: fraud, forgery, insurance misconduct, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The list looked like something you'd see on a true crime podcast, not attached to people who decorate for Christmas in September. Their bank accounts were frozen pending review. Civil penalties were stacking. Their attorney fees already hit 5 figures, and since they had mortgaged the house twice, missing even one payment put everything at risk. They missed 3. By mid-December, the bank issued a foreclosure notice. A month later, the house was padlocked. Patrick reportedly tried arguing with the repo team, but yelling doesn't stop a legal process. Evelyn cried to the neighbors, telling them I ruined their lives. She left out the part where they tried to take mine first. Ryan didn't do well with the fallout either. His networking circle evaporated faster than the champagne from his birthday drone video. Influencer friends aren't known for loyalty, especially when someone loses the lifestyle that made them interesting. He moved into a studio apartment on the cheap end of town and picked up part-time gig work that didn't involve cameras or hashtags. Lauren sent one more message a few weeks later. "They're moving into a rental. Dad says the landlord is strict. Evelyn says it's temporary." Temporary was their favorite lie. She added, "I'm not living with them anymore." Good. I met with JAG one last time to close out the internal reviews. Everything related to my name was cleared. They filed a note in my record explaining the entire situation so future evaluations wouldn't get contaminated by the false allegations. When the meeting wrapped up, the lieutenant said, "If they try anything else, let us know. This won't go anywhere." For the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for paperwork to blow up or for some angry voicemail to hit my phone. The storm they created had finally run out of momentum. I spent the next few weeks finishing paperwork, catching up on duties I'd missed, and packing up my apartment. Colorado Springs offered a better commute and better housing near base, and I wanted a fresh start without the background noise of what had happened. Moving into my new place felt oddly peaceful. No old photos, no hand-me-down furniture from my parents' house, no reminders of all the patches I'd tried to apply to a family that refused to stop tearing itself apart. I bought a new couch, a dining table small enough for 1 or 2 people, and a coffee maker that didn't sound like a dying engine. Lauren called after I settled in. We talked for a while about her therapy, about my move, about nothing and everything. She apologized again even though none of this was hers to apologize for. I told her the truth. She was the only person in that family I still cared about. She laughed quietly and said, "I know. The truth is, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I just felt like I'd finally stopped losing pieces of myself trying to keep everyone else afloat. The chaos they created didn't disappear overnight, but it wasn't sitting on my chest anymore. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized I didn't need an ending, or a moral lesson, or some cinematic closure to make any of it worthwhile. I just needed the space to breathe in a life that wasn't built on someone else's expectations. Settling into the new apartment in Colorado Springs felt almost too quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet, the kind you get in the minutes right after something heavy finally gets lifted off your shoulders. The place was small but clean, and everything inside it actually belonged to me. No hand-me-downs from my parents' house. No furniture with memories attached. No items that someone else insisted I keep. Just a normal apartment with new paint, stiff carpets, and a window view of the mountains. On my first morning there, sunlight came through the blinds in a way I didn't hate. I made coffee, the good kind this time. Not the bargain tin I used to justify because my family needs the money more. I let it brew slow, filling the kitchen with a smell that didn't remind me of anything except the fact that I bought it for myself. I took a sip, leaned against the counter, and realized how strange it felt not to start my day in a defensive stance. No panic emails. No demands for money, no chaos disguised as obligation. My phone buzzed around 8. It was a message from my CO, letting me know the last of the paperwork had cleared through the system. My record was officially clean. No flags, no holds, no pending evaluations. I was fully reinstated, and everything tied to the accusations was logged as resolved. It was the straight-to-the-point military version of, "You're good." I put the phone down and grabbed a jacket. The cold Colorado air hit me the moment I stepped outside, but it wasn't the kind that chased you back indoors. It was crisp, sharp, grounding, the kind of cold that made you pay attention to your breathing. I walked toward base, partly for the exercise, partly because I needed to be somewhere familiar after weeks of feeling like my life was stuck between courtrooms and crisis lines. Fort Carson looked the same. Soldiers moving in groups, trucks rolling out for training. The standard morning energy that never changed, no matter what personal disaster someone was dealing with. That stability had always been the ironic comfort of the military. It didn't bend for anyone's chaos. It didn't pause to ask how you were doing. Life kept moving, and so did you. Daniel spotted me as I approached the office. He gave a nod, the kind that said he'd been waiting to see if I still looked like someone with a nuclear family meltdown behind her. "You alive?" he asked. "Unfortunately for some people," I said. He laughed. "Heard everything got cleared." "Yeah. Systems clean." CID closed their review. JAG filed all their statements. He shook his head. "Your family really tried to take you down." "They took their shot," I said. "It just wasn't a good one." Inside the office, things felt normal again. Emails, schedules, logistics, requests, mundane problems I'd take any day over the mess my family created. I sat down at my desk, organized a few files, and checked the training calendar. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unpredictable. Nothing that required defending my sanity. Lauren texted me around lunchtime. "OT appointment today." "It hurts more than I expected." I wrote back. "Pain usually means progress with those exercises. You're doing the hard part." She responded. "Trying." She sounded tired, but not the same kind of tired she used to be. This version was quieter, not dragged down by lies or manipulations, just the weight of dealing with a chronic illness she should have gotten treatment for earlier. It wasn't fair, but at least she wasn't fighting her illness and our family at the same time anymore. After work, I drove out toward Garden of the Gods, one of those places everyone in Colorado pretends they discovered first. The red rock formations were lit up by the fading afternoon sun. I found a spot to park and stepped out, letting the wind hit me. It carried that desert mountain scent, dry, cold, clean. It felt like a reset button. Standing there, I thought about everyone in my family and the wreckage they created. Not in a vengeful way, more like someone observing the aftermath of a storm. Patrick and Evelyn had moved into some rental on the far side of town, dealing with foreclosure notices, attorney calls, and investigations that weren't going away anytime soon. Ryan was back to square one, posting motivational quotes online like that counted as a personality. Lauren was trying to rebuild her life slowly, appointment by appointment, with a therapist who actually listened to her instead of reminding her to tough it out. And me? I finally wasn't trying to hold them together. For a long time, I thought being the strong one meant absorbing everyone else's crises until I had nothing left for myself. I thought saying no was cruel. I thought stepping back meant I'd failed them, but standing in the cold wind with the mountains in front of me, it was embarrassingly obvious that the only failing I'd been doing was pretending their behavior was normal. I stayed there for a while, listening to the wind move through the rocks, not thinking too hard, not analyzing. Just letting the quiet settle in a way it never could in my parents' house. When the sun dipped low, I drove back into town. The lights from the streets and restaurants reflected off the now dark sky. People were out, laughing, carrying bags, living their lives without any idea of the hurricane I'd just crawled out of. I didn't feel separate from them anymore. I felt like someone who finally had space for a life of her own. Back in my apartment, I tossed my keys on the counter and sank into the new couch. It creaked a little, not because it was old, but because it hadn't been used yet. I propped my feet up, grabbed a blanket, and let myself sit there in the kind of comfort that didn't come with strings attached. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Lauren, or my command, or a lawyer. It was a simple notification. Welcome to Colorado Springs. Probably an automated message from some app, but it made me smile anyway. It felt fitting. I leaned back, took a long breath, and let it out slowly. For the first time in years, the only thing I owed anyone was the truth I'd learned the hard way. Loving your family doesn't mean you let them burn your life down. Loyalty is not a blank check, and choosing yourself isn't betrayal, no matter how loudly the wrong people pretend it is. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to avoid anything, but because my body finally had permission to rest without keeping watch for whatever disaster my family might unleash next. The apartment was quiet, the air was warm, the world felt still in a way I didn't realize I'd been needing, and sitting there, surrounded by nothing but space, I finally got to call my own. I let the calm settle deeper.